Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Good evening and welcome to the Town of Ajax Committee of Adjustment meeting for March 30th, 2022. This meeting of the Committee of Adjustment is being held electronically and live streamed on the internet. Due to the COVID-19 emergency and requirements for physical distancing, no in-person attendance is permitted at this meeting. All regular practices and procedures of the committee continue to apply during this electronic meeting. If we encounter any technical difficulties, we may take a brief recess while they are resolved. Thank you for your patience, and we will now proceed with the meeting. Before moving on to the application portion of this evening's meeting, I would like to confirm whether there are any disclosures of interest from members of committee.
There's none.
Seeing none, thank you. And if we can look for adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting from February 23rd. Sorry, I think I saw Cecil first.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the minutes of the last meeting.
Great. And do we have a seconder? Wasif, thank you. And all those in favor? Great. Minutes from the February 23rd meeting have been adopted. The committee is bound by the Planning Act to assess each application based upon its ability to meet 4 tests: that the application is minor in nature, is desirable for the appropriate development or use of the lands, and finally is in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the official plan and zoning bylaw. The process for tonight's meeting will be conducted in the following manner. The applicant and/or agent will be called upon and at their option may provide a brief description of the minor variance application they have applied for. Committee members may ask questions of the applicant and/or agent, after which anyone with a direct interest in the application will be given the opportunity to speak either for or against the application. Once a motion is put forward by a committee member, there will be no further input from the applicant or anyone having interest in the application. After a decision is made, notice will be sent out and there will be a 20-day appeal period. Anyone having interest in the application may appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal within 20 days of the decision of the committee. After 20 days, the decision will become final and binding. If a building permit or other approvals are required, they may be filed during the appeal period. However, no building permits will be issued until the appeal period is over and the decision becomes final and binding. A respectful decorum during this evening's proceedings is expected of all present at all times. And beginning with introductions of members of committee, with us tonight, we have Mark Pavlik, Cecil Ramnath, Wasif Ahmed, and the chair of the committee, Greg Whitfield. And with us from town staff, we have Eric Simpson, senior planner and secretary treasurer for the town of Ajax. The first application for this evening's meeting, sorry, just one sec, is application A5/21 for the property at 82 Church Street. The variances requested are to permit a minimum setback of 0.8 meters between a wall of a building containing a door and a front lot line, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum setback of 1 meter to be provided between any wall of a building or structure containing a door and a lot line. To permit no drive aisle on the subject property as a result of a shared drive aisle located on the abutting property to the north, whereas the bylaw requires a 6.7 meter drive aisle for 2-direction traffic. To permit a minimum of 18 parking spaces on the subject property for a place of worship, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum of 63 parking spaces to be located on the lot for a place of worship. To permit a minimum setback from the front lot line of 0 meters, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum front lot line setback of 9 meters. And to permit a minimum setback from the north interior side lot line of 7.3 meters and a minimum setback from the south interior side lot line of 1.3 meters, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum interior side lot line setback of 9.0 meters. Eric, was notice served, and outside of the responses you forwarded us so far, were any other responses received?
Yes, notice was served, and it was just the 3 pieces of correspondence that were provided.
Great, thank you. And for the applicant, staff have written a report recommending approval of the application, subject to 4 conditions within the staff report. 1, that the owner or applicant obtain approval of site plan amendment application SPA 3/21 to the satisfaction of the town, or this decision shall become null and void. 2, that the owner or applicant obtain all necessary building permits from the town's building services section, or this decision shall become null and void. 3, that the owner or applicant enter into the necessary parking agreements with the owners of adjacent properties to the satisfaction of the town, with the town as a party to such agreements, or the minimum parking space variance shall become null and void. And 4, that the drive aisle variance shall become null and void in the event that the subject property is not developed in accordance with site plan amendment application SPA 3/21. For the applicant, have you received a copy of this staff report?
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did.
Great, thank you. And do you have any questions or comments about the conditions recommended by staff?
No, I do not at this time. I want to thank Eric for his thoroughness on preparing this and appreciate all of his hard work in creating this report.
Great, thank you. Well, if you'd like to take this opportunity to introduce yourself and if you'd like to provide further context to the variances being requested, now's your opportunity.
Sure. My name is Bram Vandenheuvel. I work for Stonecrest Engineering. Stonecrest Engineering has been engaged by the church group to assist them through the site plan approval process, through which I've been actively working with Eric and other staff members. As Eric's report alludes to, we are looking to do a 4,000 square foot addition to the current premises and are seeking relief of a few items as listed. And so, no, I don't have anything further to contribute or any questions at this point. Again, just thanks to Eric for preparing this for us.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, for members of the committee, do we have any questions for the applicant or staff on the variances presented? Mark?
Yeah, a question through Mr. Chair to the applicant. Would you be able to elaborate or explain further on how you anticipate that the parking situation will be handled, despite the fact you'll have a limited number of parking spaces on site?
Absolutely. I will defer that to Eric because he has been actively working with Doug, the owner, on this particular item. So, Eric, if you want to respond to that question, please.
Through the chair, yeah, sure. So 63 parking spaces are required as per the zoning bylaw requirements. However, the site is limited to only 18 parking spaces, which has always been the case. So with the shared parking agreement that's already in place between the town and the Durham Catholic District School Board for the abutting parking lot to the north, that will also allow for additional spaces. The owner has also consulted with the owners, or one of the owners, in 92 Church Street South, which is a condominium, as well as the property owner of 66 Church Street South. So what the town will be requiring is that the owner enters into actual formal shared parking agreements with both of those owners as well. So through the combination of these 3 parking agreements plus the 18 parking spaces that they already have on their own site, they would be able to meet that minimum zoning bylaw parking requirement.
Okay, and through Mr. Chair, to clarify, Eric, those would be written agreements that would be in place. When would they be required to be in place? Before the relief is granted, or how does the logistics work?
Yeah, so they'd have to be in place before the town could ever issue site plan approval for the site plan application. Okay. And in the event that, these parking agreements weren't in place, well, that's why that condition number 3 is written that way, that the parking variance becomes null and void. And we do require that these be formal agreements that are actually registered on title, just so that, if something happens, the town's a party of it. We know if it's trying to be released from title, because then that results with the parking deficiency. And you may have seen from the correspondence that there has been, I guess, a disconnect or just some confusion with 92 Church Street South. That being that is a condo. So there are individual property owners for the different units. And there is a commercial section on the ground floor of that building. And I guess the owner of those commercial units has already entered into an agreement with 82 Church Street South, which I do note in the report. However, we did receive correspondence from the actual condominium corporation today that, they weren't aware of any of this and they object. So I spoke to the condominium corporation, and I think it's a matter of they need to now kind of do their legal due diligence and make sure that the owner of the commercial units has the ability to kind of do that without their consent, or if it is going to need the their consent in order to move forward. So that is a matter that still has to be kind of kinked out between all three parties before, the town would be able to move forward with a formal parking agreement. Outside of that, there already is one that exists for the town and the Durham Catholic District School Board. That's already registered. And then there will have to be another agreement with the owners of 66 Church Street South. So the applicant is going to have to work with them on that, but they have obtained their consent to kind of have those parking spaces. So it's just a matter of getting an agreement together.
Okay, so if I could just say that for, in other words, so I'm understanding it, the one with the Durham Catholic School Board in the town, that's already a signed agreement, so that's happening.
Correct.
Yep. The one with 62 Church Street, there's verbal consent, but they still have to, get that in writing, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And then the third one with the condo, if the condo, the management company, I guess, didn't have legal authorization to make an agreement, and it had to go through the condo corporation, I think you said. In any case, if there's a legal issue there that prevents them entering into an agreement, then the relief becomes null and void anyway. So you need all three agreements to be successfully entered in order for the relief to be granted. That's correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's just because the agreements that we envisioned would be in place equate to the 63 spaces. So if they're unable for some reason to work out with the condo and get 92 Church Street South into a formal agreement, that means that, we wouldn't be in a position to move forward with site plan approval. They're going to have to try to make arrangements with another property to come up with those parking spaces.
Okay. Yeah. So our risk is mitigated, because if that falls through, then they'd have to work on another solution. It just doesn't rely on the other two. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and that's why the condition is worded that way and just says adjacent properties rather than being specific, because we did have a situation on Church Street as well, actually, for another variance previously, where we actually listed the property that they were going to enter into an agreement with, and then something backfired, and because the condition was so specific, they weren't able to satisfy that condition, and we had to redo the variance all over. So,
understood. Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Cecil?
Thank you, through the chair. Just as a follow-up of the parking question that my colleague was just asking, through the chair to the town, what is the life of the parking agreement that we're talking about?
Through the chair, sorry, can you just repeat that question again, Cecil?
What is the life of the parking agreement? Like the town is going to, or the church is going to enter into a parking agreement with other facilities nearby, and to the approval of the town. I was just wondering what's the life of those agreements. Is it like a 5-year agreement, a 10-year agreement, an annual agreement?
Yeah, so because it's ultimately a private agreement for the other two, that will depend on what those owners want to pursue. It could very much likely just be an annual agreement. Therefore, they'll have to, continuously do it. Whereas the one that's with the town that already exists, that one's a 5-year basis.
Right. So that if it's an annual agreement, you can break the agreement at any time, right? And then the parking variance is in default. Then what? The building is built, and then you have a parking issue.
Mr. Chair, it's Doug. If I can answer that.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, why don't we let Cecil finish his thought, and then?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yes. So what happens if an owner decides that, look, I don't want to pursue with parking anymore, then what's the next course of action?
Do you want me to try to answer that?
Yeah, this is open to anyone.
Sure. I've been directly involved with the discussions with the owners for the extra parking that we've been needing. All of them seem to be okay with a year-to-year agreement, but we've made it extremely clear to them that this is going to be long term. I mean, we can't say 10 years, 20 years, but for us to make this work, there's no intention of us ever breaking the agreement or stopping. We need the parking, so we're going to keep it. We're happy to put that in writing to the town if that's requirement. But as far as the private agreements, as Eric said, they're used to just doing 1 year terms. As a matter of fact, the 66 Church Street business that has 11 parking spots, they just gave us an open-ended agreement. There was no expiry date on there, I don't believe. But again, on our case, you raise a valid point. I could see your point, and certainly we'd want to make sure you're comfortable that we have every intention of this being long-term, without a doubt, and be very good neighbors so that people don't want to cancel on us. So,
understand. Through the chair, I have a couple more questions. Should I pursue with those questions, or?
Yeah, absolutely, Cecil. Whatever you have.
Yes. So the church will have a capacity of 250 people, and there is a proposed setback of 0 meters from the Church Street side exit to the front lot line. So I see that fire and emergency has signed off on it. So given a 0 meter setback, am I to assume that fire and emergency will have to revisit the safety of this exit when Church Street is eventually widened, or is this already factored in? That question to staff.
Through the chair, yeah, our fire and emergency services department has already reviewed this. I just want to point out that it's a 0 meter setback, but that's not to the current road. That's because a new lot line will be created because of the road widening.
Right.
And even then, it's not that the building will be adjacent to the road. It's going to be adjacent to the right of way. There will be a boulevard before the actual pavement of the roadway would start. The fire route is contained on that shared drive aisle to the north, which is part of the parking lot. And Church Street as well can be used as a fire route. So there isn't any concerns from that, I guess, that regards from fire and safety.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. I've got another question for staff. So with the casino coming on stream, etc., the need for traffic flow in both directions is critical, especially in this zone. Now, there was a mention of a parking attendant in the report to always ensure organized parking, and I was just wondering what this would look like. So the applicant, would you kindly explain what that would look like?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I can answer that.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's an important question. We currently, and we've actually always had a parking attendant, even at our previous location, to make sure that people are arriving safely. They're parking where they're supposed to park. If there's places that they're not supposed to park, he monitors that. So that will be, again, just something that we always do, and we will continue to do, is have, as a matter of fact, we're looking at having 2 parking attendants once the building goes up, so that we'll have a very easy flow of traffic and everybody's parking where they're supposed to park, and we're keeping people safe.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just asking if that answers your question.
That partially answered that. I'm just going to follow up with another question in relation to that. Would this be like a paid position or a volunteer position?
He's a member of our church, and so he does this as a volunteer position. And as I said, we will have at least 2 coming once the building is up. We'll have at least 2 parking attendants there all the time. It's just a parking team. It's very common for churches to do that stuff. So, but we've done it, as I said, we've had this going on for a long time already. So,
there was experience in that.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that answer. And through the chair, I've got another question. So in looking at the 0 meter setback, once again, I'm just looking at the worst case scenario here. I know that fire and emergency has looked at this. I'm looking at a worst case scenario where the weather is good, the church is in full session, 250 people, seniors are out for a walk, and mothers are walking their babies in strollers on the sidewalk along Church Street, and the fire alarm sounds. Is there a potential safety issue that the fire department would have covered the staff?
Through the chair, that entrance that faces the potential new front lot line is not the only entrance. There's also another primary entrance that would face the north. So in the event that something like that happened, not everyone would be directed, directly to that sidewalk.
Do you see any potential safety issue in this scenario then?
Staff do not, no.
Okay. Is there, to staff, is there a left turn lane that's planned for Church Street North sometime in the future?
So I'm not entirely sure what the future right-of-way design will look like. I understand that it will likely be 2 lanes each way. And then there'd probably be a middle turning lane, like a shared middle turning lane, but I'm not entirely sure what it looks like. This is a very far out project. Very far out. So I think the reality is even though we'd be, conveying these lands now or securing these lands, it's going to remain in these interim conditions for a very long time.
Okay. And if I can ask one last question to the applicant through the chair, would you foresee pursuing a left turn lane for traffic coming north and into the place of worship?
Can I answer that, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
That's a good question, and it's one that would be unlikely. I don't think we see that very much. Most of the people would be coming from the north and driving directly into the parking lot. So, and also I should let you know, the 2 current arrangements we have for the excess parking at 92 and at 66, we are assigning our members those parking lots so that they will be going there. There won't be any guesswork which parking lot people are going to. So everybody will know pre-assigned where they're going to be parking on every Sunday. So we'll have that as well. But as far as the left turn, I don't see that being an issue. From the majority of our people are coming from the north.
Gotcha.
Just one other comment through the chair, please. Just for the committee members as well, and for their knowledge. So a parking consultant has been retained on this project to assist on a traffic impact study. So that is part of the site plan agreement process. So it is something that we're working in tandem with Ajax on. So just a quick comment on that.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thanks, Cecil. Any further questions from members of committee? Seeing none. Okay. And I understand we have one individual here to speak to the application. Mr. Dixon, if you'd like to put yourself off mute, and now's your opportunity to speak.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Having heard, no, I have no further questions. I believe there will be a follow-up about the parking arrangements in 92 Church Street from the condominium corporation itself.
Okay. Thank you. Before we move on, any questions for Mr. Dixon from members of the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Okay. All right. If we could then look for a motion on the application, if there's no further questions or comments from committee. Mark?
Mr. Chair, I move for the committee to approve application A5/21 for 82 Church Street South, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report, seeing that the application is minor in nature and meets the remaining tests.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And is there a seconder on that motion, please? Okay. Okay. I do not see a seconder, so Mark, unfortunately, your motion fails. Is there another committee member who would like to make a motion on the application? Do we need to have any further discussion on the application before we proceed with the motion? Any questions for staff or the applicant? Wasif?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to town staff, are you able to maybe comment on the drainage issue and the snow issue in terms of where it's stored and its possible impact to adjacent properties?
Through the chair, yeah, sure. And I think the applicant as well, Bram, would be able to provide a lot more on that. But all drainage has to be maintained on site. We're not going to approve something that would result with adverse drainage impacts to a neighboring property. There will be some snow storage likely just within the landscaping areas adjacent to the northern parking spaces. Outside of that, there is already snow removal that takes place in that shared parking lot to the north. That's part of the agreement that's in place. And perhaps, Bram, you could explain the swale and just how the drainage will be configured.
Sure. Yes, through the chair to the committee member. Yes, we have to complete civil engineering and stormwater management on this particular parcel. We've had to complete a stormwater management report that's already been completed and reviewed by staff through the site plan approval process. There's a proposed drainage swale. Essentially, the pre conditions have to match the post conditions in terms of water drainage off the site, and it has to be designed as such to not adversely affect any neighboring properties. So I can assure you that working together with the town and with Eric and with our civil engineer, that we will achieve that goal, and that work has already primarily been completed. We've also been in contact with the Conservation Authority in regards to how our designs relate to them, and we've had consent and approval from them as well. So yes, all of that engineering has already been completed, and will be part of our final submission for site plan approval.
Does that answer your question, Wasif?
I think Wasif might be on mute still.
No, my question was good. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Wasif. Any further questions for staff or the applicant? Or do we have another motion we'd like to put forward?
I'd like to put forth the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Wasif.
I'd like to move that the committee approve application A521 on the basis that it is minor in nature and subject to the conditions in the staff report.
Great, thank you. And is there a seconder on that motion, please? Seconded by Mark, thank you. And all those in favor of the application being approved? Okay, all in favor? Application A5/21 for 82 Church Street is approved, subject to the conditions in the staff report and the 20-day appeal period. Thank you to the applicant and the owner and Mr. Dixon for attending.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate all your work and your help with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. Have a good evening. Okay, moving on to our second application for this evening, application A3/22 for 40 Blowers Crescent. Variances requested are to permit a minimum of 70 parking spaces for a medical clinic, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum of 79 parking spaces, and to permit a minimum setback from the front lot line of 3.5 meters, whereas the bylaw requires a minimum front lot line setback of 9 meters. Eric, was notice served and were any responses received?
Notice was served and no responses were received.
Great, thank you. For the applicant, staff have written a report recommending approval of the application, subject to two conditions within the report. One, that the owner or applicant obtain approval of site plan application SP7/21 to the satisfaction of the town, or this decision shall become null and void. And two, that the owner or applicant obtain all necessary building permits from the town's building services section, or this decision shall become null and void. For the applicant, have you received a copy of this report? And do you have any questions or comments on the recommendations from staff?
Through the chair, this is Nick Swordfinger, the applicant and agent. No, we do not have any questions or concerns with that. Just to make the comment that there was a traffic study done and a parking study done for the property as part of the site plan agreement application, which recommended the 70 parking spaces as permitted, and the minimum setback falls in line with the urban design recommendations through the town. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions from members of committee for the applicant? Cecil?
Yes, to the applicant. In regards to the parking study, I do respect the work that the engineering group has done for parking. I was wondering whether you can expand on some of the critical areas that the engineering study group might have looked at to conclude a lesser amount of parking.
Through the chair, thanks very much for the question. As the architect, I'm not, I wish I would have been more prepared for that question, because I would have actually got the parking consultant in and had a more specific answer to it. But going through the report and everything and talking in consultation when we're going through the site plan application and pre-consultation of this development, it's a new development. And based on the shared parking rates that were performed on the study, they felt with other precedent studies, which is essentially how they do their parking studies and come up with it, that they felt that the provided 70 would be an acceptable relief in terms of the bylaw. As you're aware, this is a new development. The lands where this development occurs is essentially all greenland infill. There is nothing around it. There are many other applications that will probably be coming forward in the future. If staff can comment on that on this area. And that's essentially, I'm not the parking engineer, so sorry, I can't provide a more detailed response to your question.
No, thank you for your response. I was wondering whether staff can add to that.
Yeah, so through the parking study, the consultant, which is pretty common amongst a lot of studies that are completed, they rely on different publications prepared by the Institute of Transportation of Engineers, referred to as the ITE. These are national publications that basically, I don't know how they've generated all these, but they look at different uses, and then based on a GFA, a gross floor area of those uses, they indicate, well, typically this is what your peak parking would be. So based on, the previous analysis that's already gone into these publications that consultants rely on, it kind of associates a rate with this type of use being a medical clinic, then it looks at this proposal specifically, the area that's proposed, and then it aligns the two. And when they did that in the analysis, it only came to 54 spaces. So they definitely think that the proposed 70, which is only a shortage of 9 spaces, is more than sufficient to accommodate the true parking demand of the development.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Cecil. Any further questions for the applicant from members of the committee? Wasif?
Through the chair, most likely to the staff, near the end of the report, it mentions the fact that the owner of the property in question at 40 Blowers Crescent would need to build a sidewalk. Is that something that should be part of the conditions of this variance, or would that be something that we captured within the site plan application?
Through the chair, so that's something that'd be captured through the site plan, through the actual approval of the drawings and the fact that we would be collecting securities through the site plan agreement.
Okay, thought so. Just wanted to confirm. Thank you, staff.
Okay. Thank you, Wasif. Any further questions for the applicant? Seeing none. Okay, and is there anyone here to speak either for or against the application this evening? Seeing none. In that case, if we could look for a motion on the application, please. Wasif, I think I saw your hand first.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to propose that the committee approve application for A322 for 40 Blowers Crescent on the basis that it is minor in nature and meets the 4 tests.
Great. Thank you, Wasif. And is there a seconder on the motion, please? Cecil? Seconded by Cecil. Thank you. And all those in favor? Great. All in favor. Application A3/22 is approved, subject to the conditions within the staff report and the 20-day appeal period.
Thank you very much. I just want to also thank Eric for all of his assistance in providing such a thorough analysis and feedback of all our materials that were submitted. Appreciated.
Great. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, and that concludes the application portion of this evening's meeting. For members of committee or staff, we'll move on to any additional or new business that we may have. Otherwise, we can look for a motion to adjourn if there is none. Cecil?
Mr. Chair, I move to join the meeting.
Great, thank you. And is there a seconder? Wasif, thank you. All those in favor? Great. So this evening's meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.